Hi, all. This is another short lecture as we get started in this course. Clearly, you signed up to study classical rhetoric, but oftentimes we get asked, like, what's the point of studying this really old stuff? So, why study classical rhetoric? First, we'll just say a little bit about what do we mean when we talk about classical rhetoric. But more importantly, how does classical rhetoric apply to our contemporary lives? So, where can we apply rhetoric? Where do we see locations of rhetoric and purposes of rhetoric? So, what is classical rhetoric? Classical rhetoric refers to the study of effective persuasion, originating in ancient Greece and Rome, where it was considered a vital skill for citizens to participate in public life, particularly in court proceedings, political debates, and public ceremonies. Essentially, the study of rhetoric started as a way for people to learn how to argue and persuade others effectively within a democratic society. So, classical rhetoric means working on these foundational texts that set part of what is the basis for what we think of when we think of Western thought. And it arises in Greek democracy. And we will study through kind of the rise of Christianity, but really the influence of classical rhetoric continues well into the 18th century and then is kind of reignited in the 20th century because of scholars of rhetoric. Okay? So classical rhetoric is that focus on ancient Greece and Rome, but because those texts have been so influential over time in our history of thought. Okay? So applications of classical rhetoric. There are things that studying classical rhetoric can help you to do as a writer and a speaker. For example, paying attention to what these ancient thinkers thought about when they thought about how can we persuade other people can help you think about your own writing and ways to communicate more effectively, thereby improving both writing and speaking abilities. A big part of the rhetorical discussion is focused not only on the speaker or writer, but also on the listener or the reader, the audience. So thinking about classical rhetoric can help us enhance our awareness of what an audience is and how we might adjust what we do to make our message more effective for that audience. We can also think about communication differently, not just in terms of audience, but also in terms of the contextual and timely nature of communication. And we'll talk about this idea of kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, kairos, which is the idea of kind of the right time and the right place for a particular argument and a particular way of persuading. Okay? And it can also promote ethical communication. We'll talk about what is the role of the speaker and writer and what are their ethical obligations. For some of these ancient thinkers, the ethos of the speaker is perhaps the most important consideration. We think about the problematic nature of rhetoric as a tool, as an art that can be used to persuade others. What if the person who wants to use rhetoric is very effective at it, but is trying to convince people to do the wrong thing, right? This is thinking about ethics, right? As a reader and a listener, can also improve the ways in which we engage with text. Most importantly, can improve our critical reading and listening skills. We can listen for not only what is being said, but also how it's being said. What techniques are being used to try to persuade us as an audience? And are those techniques fair, or are they maybe logical fallacies where writers or speakers are trying to kind of pull the wool over our eyes with some kind of unfair thinking or unclear thinking? It will help us then ultimately analyze and understand text more effectively. We can get to the root of what is this author trying to accomplish with the thing they're writing? What is the speaker trying to accomplish with the thing they're saying? And is it what they're actually saying, or is it a combination of what they're saying and how they're saying it, what they're not saying? Are they trying to hide maybe some inconvenient truths, or are they trying to emphasize only particular points? or are we getting a fair and balanced discussion that ethically asks us to consider another position and be persuaded? Ultimately, thinking about rhetoric and thinking about the texts that other people create and the text that we create can help us become a more informed and engaged citizen in our own democratic society. So originally, there were 3 locations of rhetoric. So there is deliberative rhetoric that's focused on the future, and it included primarily discussions of politics, what we should or should not do as a society. Okay, so we want to persuade or dissuade people to do or not do things. Judicial, or the courts, also known as forensic rhetoric, focuses on the past, what did or did not happen. We accuse or defend people. And you can imagine how in a democratic society, both of these locations of rhetoric were very important, right? People needed to be able to, as statesmen, argue for what the society should or should not do, what laws we should or should not pass, what policies we should or should not adopt. Judicial, obviously in the courts, you need to be able to accuse people who have done you wrong or defend yourself if you're wrongfully accused, right? But there's one other area of public discussion and debate, and that is where we can praise or blame people publicly through epideictic rhetoric, which is rhetoric in public ceremonies. Most famously, we have the ceremonies of funerals, for example, where people are oftentimes eulogized in particular ways to make us praise the person who is now gone, right? And make us feel something as the audience listening to that discussion of a person. Now we can see how all these 3 areas still exist in our contemporary world, right? We still have arguments in governments, and those kinds of arguments also happen then in businesses, where you try to decide what we should or should not do moving forward. And we still have the courts. Now we have lawyers who are really specialists in rhetoric, in arguing on your behalf, right? Either to accuse someone else or to defend you if you've been accused. And we still certainly have public speaking for events. They don't have to be funerals, right? They can be celebrations of things as well. Okay, but there are, of course, many more locations of rhetoric. So rhetoric, if it originally was oratory, focused on speaking, it was focused on those places where people had to speak in public to present their ideas so they could persuade others to believe as they did. As writing became more important and other areas of speech became more central to the lives of people, that changed. So we can see this early on. With the rise of Christianity, we have the rise of homiletics or sermonics. So the writing and delivering of homilies or sermons. We see with the rise of literacy and diplomacy, things like the importance of letter writing and other kinds of communications between nations and nation states. And as technology changes, right, and as literacy increases, and into the 20th century, we have new media, the radio, the telephone, recorded audio in different ways, of course, the television, the internet, and social media. Now, it seems like we are bombarded by messages continuously. So being able to deconstruct and understand those messages, not only for what they seem to say, but also for how they say it and what message or persuasion they're really trying to do, is a very important tool to make sure we are literate in not only reading literacy, right, but literate in information. Informational literacy is a big challenge today, where so many people see something on the internet and believe it to be true because they want it to be true, or because it seems likely, or it seems to come from a reliable source. And so we have to be much more careful about those things we believe. So rhetoric and the study of rhetoric can help us do that, right? Um, Purposes of rhetoric, right? If the purposes of rhetoric were to accuse or defend in the courts, or to decide what we should or should not do moving forward, or to praise or blame someone publicly, we can see lots of other ways in which rhetoric can be used. So Taylor Swift, not only an entertainer, which you might think of public discourse as the primary goal is to entertain while we're praising or blaming. She certainly wants to entertain, but she also uses her position in society to make political arguments. Um, right? So this kind of intermingling of purposes, right? We might think of course, we have politics, right? Um, if we are more careful about the ways in which we use rhetoric as speakers and writers and the ways in which we use rhetoric as consumers of messages, maybe we can cut through some of the problems in contemporary political discourse. Um, Obviously, still judicial rhetoric, but also things like teaching, right? So thinking about how we as teachers are giving particular information and want to persuade students to learn what we need them to learn and to think in particular ways, we can think about how we can use rhetoric to be more effective in that communication to them. Of course, we're just getting started. So it's another quick video, just getting these ideas out there, putting them in our heads. So as we're reading this week, we're thinking about lots of different ways in which classical rhetoric is going to lead us to think about our contemporary selves, our contemporary texts, our contemporary world. As before, watch the other videos, read the assignments, and share your thoughts in this week's assignment, the discussion board. If you have any questions, please contact me. I'm here to help.